Hello, I'm Roy Weatherall. I am a founding engineer at Alfresco and the architect responsible for governance services. At Alfresco, we understand that the value of your business is in your content and in your processes. And governance services is about giving you the toolkit to protect that investment. We're able to provide you with security controls, with record keeping capabilities, and all the other bits and pieces that you need in order to meet your compliance requirements and also protect your investment. We believe that governance services is an integral part of a digital platform, able to work seamlessly with both content and process. We also understand that if the users don't use a system, then obviously this is for nothing. So we make sure that it is invisible to our end users, and governance will just happen around the work that they do every day. So let's take a deeper look at some of the components we provide. Okay, so let's take a look at the governance services REST API. As you can see, it sits between our content services and process services as a standalone API in its own right, but we also work it to enhance and complement those other two services. When you look further down, you see that the governance services are split into four major areas. And to begin with, we'll have a look at records management, which makes up the biggest part of our content service offering. The center of the records management capability is the file plan, and that kind of encompasses all of the main sort of records management features you would expect from a product. In addition to that, we have what we call our automation component. Now that allows us to take the content rules that we use in the repository and repurpose those, especially for governance services, in particular records management. This allows us to build smart file plans that can take the load off the records management team and allow them to do the job that they're supposed to be there to do. Obviously, we have the normal kind of retention and destruction capabilities that you would expect. We support various different types of records. The records that are very unique to us are what we call the easy access records. These make records management almost invisible to the end user, so they can work with content and collaborate, work with a process, and when the time is right, it will become a record. And they will still have access to that content, but they don't need to know anything about the records management capabilities behind there. Now, in some cases, we're not going to own that content, but we don't want to preclude people from being able to manage their records. In that case, we can work with third-party tools to provide in-place records, where the third-party tool will manage the content on our behalf, and we will just simply give you the records management tools that you need. And finally, out of the box, we support DoD 5015.02 baseline. That gives us a kind of a benchmark for ensuring that our capabilities are good enough for a real-life environment. But we also make sure that the services are suitable for extending so that customers and partners can provide their own geographical implementations, for example, VERS or MOREC. Okay, let's take a look at our discovery component. So discovery is extremely important when you're dealing with a governed environment. You need to be able to find very quickly and easily all of your very valuable content, otherwise it may not be of any use to you. So what we do is we take the search services, we extend and complement those to make sure that it's the same user experience and the same APIs, but that those searches take into consideration the compliance that may have been overlaid onto that content. Now, being able to find your content is obviously very important, and one of the particular reasons in the governed environment that's very important is if somebody requests for you to provide a particular package of information. Now, that can happen as part of a legal requirement or simply as a request for information, as a FOIA request. So one of the things we provide is a way of taking that information into a package and defining it as what we call a legal hold. And that means that you've recorded exactly what you've gathered at that point in time. You can put security around that, but most importantly, it prevents that stuff from being deleted. It will retain it for you. Okay, and so then you've got a certain level of accountability, and that means that you're at lower risk of not meeting your compliance requirements. Next, let's look at classification. Now, this is an extremely important component for our government customers. Now, what we allow you to do is actually take records or documents and give them a classification. You do that in order to ensure that the right people can see it and the wrong people can't. Now, what's unique about a classification is that it actually travels with the document. So when you think about normal permissions, normal ACL style permissions, they're obviously attached to the hierarchy that the item's within, and movements of that item can change that access. But in this scenario, and it's the same with security marks, as we'll see later on, that information travels with the document. Now, twin to this is the ability for us to give users and groups security classifications, and it's taking that classification and those clearances and matching them up in the way. That's how the services decide who can see what. Now, we do this check at a very low level behind the scenes, and that means that everywhere that you access this content, that will be applied. So that means you can come through Share, or you can come through a REST API or CIFS, and you can guarantee that if you've classified that item and the user has a particular clearance, that they'll only see what they're allowed to see, which is obviously incredibly important. Now, to support this, we have what we call a declassification lifecycle. That's a set of additional information that you can apply to a classified item to give further context. That might be as simple as describing why this item has been classified. But more interestingly, you're also able to define the declassification life cycle for that item, or maybe a stage downgrade. So you can kind of describe how that item is going to gradually become more and more available to the people in your organization. Now, finally, we also provide what we call guided classification. So this allows the security officer and his team to take his security policy and actually code it into the product in a separate taxonomy that they can manage. Now, when a user goes to classify an item, they can refer to the guide and decide which one of those entries is applicable to them and apply that entry. And that will take all of this information that we've already talked about and apply it to the item and classify it. Now, obviously, this means that the security team can control that policy and make sure everybody follows it, but it also makes it very easy and transparent for the user to actually confidently classify items correctly. Finally, let's take a look at security. Now, in a governed environment, security is vitally important. So what we do is we take all of the framework that we get in the core, which is very comprehensive, and we extend that further to give you even more control over that content. Now, one of the things I mentioned earlier was security marks, so let's have a chat about that first. So security marks are kind of like a superset of classification. What it allows us to do is literally stamp content with particular marks to indicate what they may contain. Now, again, those marks travel with the document, so they're all part of its metadata and controlled by its normal life cycle. An example of a mark might be PII, which indicates that that content has personal information, and obviously we need to control that personal information. So tied with that is obviously the clearances. So again, we can assign sets of marks to individual users, and when we come to that security evaluation, we can cross-reference the two, take into consideration the classification, and determine whether or not that individual can see that item. So what we also do is we take the baseline ACL structure that we get in the core, and we want to take that further again. Now, that will define who can see what, but what we also want to do is determine who can do what. By adding roles and capabilities, we can actually define sets of functions that we can assign to particular users and groups. And so when they actually go to access something, they may have read access to it, but they might not be able to do everything that they might expect. The important thing about this is control, right? It means that we can also delegate particular tasks, particular groups, but we can also control who can do what. So taking all these things into consideration, the normal ACL structure you'd expect from the core, the roles and capabilities, and all those marks and classification, it gives us a really big bag of tools that we can use to control exactly who can see what and who can do what. Thanks for joining me on this quick guide through our governance service offering. Hopefully you can see that at Alfresco we believe that governance service is an integral part of the digital platform, both process and content and governance working together to give you the solution you require. So thanks for watching, and if you have any questions, please do reach out to us.